Hello and welcome to another episode of In Session with Michael Ayala and Judge Ashley Willcott. And you all know who she is. She's a judge, she's an attorney, she's a child advocate, she's a speaking engagements all over. Also will appear on one of your favorite networks from time to time. Judge Ashley, great to see you. How's everything?
Great, Michael Lalala. Listen, I have to do a shout out to you though, because number 86 in the Substack legal news, because you love the legal news. You love to write about it. You love to research about it. That's kind of your thing.
Yeah, it was a real shock. And I got to say, it felt great. I was telling a friend of mine, now I know how the Beatles felt when they went up the charts. You see yourself going up the charts, and it's an exciting thing.
It is. It's a big deal. It's a really big deal.
There's a lot of people on Substack. So to be in the top 100, I felt real good about that. All right, folks. So we have a fantastic show for you coming up today. First and foremost, we're going to get you caught up on what's going on in the Tyler Robinson case. Again, he's the guy charged with killing Charlie Kirk. So we'll tell you all about that and what's coming up next in that case. We're also going to be following that case of Nolan Wells, getting you caught up on that. A lot going on there. We were expecting autopsies to come back today, both the private autopsy and the one that the authorities are doing, but haven't heard any word on that. But lots of great information there that we can get you caught up on and really try to figure out what is going on in this case. And then we have another case, which it's another one of those, what's going on in this case? It's the Snyder's House of Horrors. This is going on down in Vinton County, Ohio. What investigators found there was just something out of a horror movie, honestly. So we'll get you caught up on that story as well. So I want you folks to sit back, relax, get your popcorn out, because we are getting ready to start another episode of In Session. All right, Judge Ashley, let's begin with the Tyler Robinson case. It's one of those cases that's very disturbing. Why don't you get us caught up quickly on the charges in that case?
Oh, all right, Michael, really important. As you know, there are multiple charges that he's facing. Number one, the greatest of which is aggravated murder, also felony use of a firearm, obstruction of justice, witness tampering, and committing a violent act in the presence of the child. And as you know, he is facing the death penalty.
Yes, he is, and he's facing the death penalty for killing this man right here. Again, that is Charlie Kirk. He was killed on a university campus in what was truly an ugly event. Some really graphic video, but that takes me to what's going on right now. The defense in this case decided that instead of allowing the state to go into a secret proceeding in the grand jury and get an indictment, they wanted a preliminary hearing. When you are going to trial in a number of states across the country, you have the option of choosing a preliminary hearing where you force the prosecution to present just enough evidence to sort of get over that probable cause hump so the judge can then bind it over to trial. And it was an impressive presentation, I gotta say, Judge. I watched a lot of it, and they have a ton of information against this guy.
They do. And, we always call it, when the defense chooses to do that and have this type of hearing, a preliminary hearing where it's probable cause, very little evidence, any evidence at all, the judge is really going to bind it over. And this is what we consider free discovery for the defense, because the defense gets to hear the evidence, but they also get to cross-examine, obviously, the prosecution's witness and really try to sort out where they think the weaknesses are of the case that they can exploit to try to get an acquittal.
Yeah, that's an excellent assessment, because that's really what we saw go on all week last week as the prosecution put on their evidence. What the defense was trying to do was poke holes, see where some of the weaknesses are. They seemed to have a sense of where the weaknesses were, but then they dug deeper to try to figure that out. So let's go through some of the evidence. This is a videotape, a snapshot of a videotape, and this is supposed to be, or is allegedly, Tyler Robinson. And Judge, they had tons of videotape of him doing all kinds of things, driving back and forth to the campus. Apparently, he went back and forth 4 times on the day of the shooting. They're, of course, suggesting he was doing that to scope it out. They have video of him on the campus that day. They have actual video, allegedly, of him climbing up the side of the building where the sniper allegedly shot from, on the building, and then after the shooting, running off the building, jumping off, running away. They have video footage of him returning. And so it really sort of mapped out this timeline, which, as we've talked about many times, Judge, if you can really set up a timeline for jurors, it's very, very helpful for your case.
Absolutely. And what does this establish? It really establishes the opportunity because it is showing he'd been there multiple times in the area. You can easily argue casing it out. And so it's a really important piece. And I think strategically, it was really smart of the state to say, let's start with this. Here's video, and this is where he went multiple times before the actual shooting occurred.
And truthfully, the defense didn't have much of an answer to these videos. They didn't really go after it in terms of it's not him or is it him. It's pretty plainly him. And in this picture I have up, it's interesting because we find out later during the hearing that his parents, when they brought him in the following day, he was wearing these exact same clothes. So I think it's fair to say that they've got a pretty good videotape timeline of this guy involved in the case.
Lance Twiggs, we know Robinson's roommate and romantic partner. He was shown some stills of the day of the shooting, dressed in dark clothes, going up and down the steps. And it was interesting because the first 2 to 3 stills, I watched his videotaped testimony. The first 2 to 3 stills, he couldn't unequivocally say, or didn't rather say, that's him. That's Tyler Robinson. Instead, he said, those look like his clothes. Those look like his shoes. And then the third or fourth picture, he said, oh no, that's definitely Tyler Robinson, which was fascinating to me. It was just kind of the angle and he was moving in the stills. And that fourth one or third one, that's when the roommate said, no, that's him.
Yeah. What did you think of his testimony overall? Let's jump to that. Another important part of the state's case, as you mentioned, they played the roommate's testimony. The defense did object because it was just videotaped testimony with no opportunity for the defense to cross-examine. But again, this is a preliminary hearing. The evidence rules are relaxed, so the judge let it in because there's no jury there. He's listening to it. He's trying to put the pieces together to come up with whether there's probable cause here. But what did you think?
Well, first I have to say this, how smart of the state. Really, the prosecutors didn't want to give the defense an opportunity to cross-examine, to try to tie him to his testimony, which they could then use to impeach him if it goes to trial, which we all know that it will. So I think it was a smart strategic move by the state, number one. Number two, I was riveted. Michael, I said to you earlier, as I watched it, I found Lance Twiggs, the roommate, the romantic partner, so credible, so believable. I didn't find that he was exaggerating anything. I felt like he was honest, like, well, I recognize the shoes. I recognize the shirt. Oh, there he is. That's him. Now, again, you made the point, well, he's on a video. He's not being cross-examined. So good point. But I sure believed what he had to say on that video.
The defense objected strenuously that they wouldn't have that opportunity because we've seen many times in cases, Judge, where someone can look extremely credible on direct. Now, I'm not saying the officers are doing a direct, but they're not questioning his answers, right? They're asking him questions. He's giving them answers. They're not questioning those answers. When you go to cross-examination, they got to question those answers. Things can change on a dime.
No, you're absolutely right. And it will, because nobody can remember things to the exact detail of what they first said. And so necessarily witnesses' testimony is going to change a little bit. It's to what extent? And will he get rattled? Will he get nervous under a vigorous cross-examination? And if he becomes flustered, he could change what he said, or he could say, well, I don't know for sure. I mean, there's a lot that can happen with a good cross-examination.
No question. And these are definitely good defense attorneys. Let's go over some of the things he had to say.
Oh, boy.
He said that he was gone all day on the 10th, and that was the day of the shooting. He found a note on a computer in the house where he says he's off to do this thing. He said he had a chance to take him out, and I'm going to do it.
But it's even better. He didn't just find a note, Michael. He got a text from Tyler Robinson around 11 p.m. that told Twiggs, drop what you're doing, look under my keyboard. So that's step one. Step two is that's when he finds the note that was entered into evidence. It was read aloud in court. And that's the note that in part read, hey, if you're reading this per my text, then I am sorry. I left the house this morning on a mission and set an auto text I am likely dead or facing a lengthy prison sentence. I had the opportunity to take out Charlie Kirk, and I took it. I mean, that sounds like a confession.
Now, he didn't say, I took it. He said, I'm going to take it. And I contend as a defense attorney, that's an important difference. And I've got the texts up here. And I just picked out the ones that I thought were most damaging, which is one of the ones you mentioned. He says, I had the opportunity to take out Charlie Kirk, and I'm going to take it. As if it's going to happen. It hasn't happened yet. So that's something that I would worry about the credibility of if I was a defense attorney and say, what is he really saying here? Is someone else providing the opportunity? Did he end up not taking the opportunity? There's a lot to sort of go on there. He also said, you weren't the one who did it. And that's the roommate asking him. And he says, I'm sorry. So there's that, right? And then he had another one. I had enough of this hatred. Some hate can't be negotiated out. And that's important, Judge, because as you mentioned earlier, he is facing the death penalty. And one of the aggravators that allows the state to go after the death penalty is the idea that he killed Charlie Kirk because of his political views.
Yeah, and that motive, right? Every jury wants to know why. The hatred to go after a political figure for his political views, boy, does that not give a compelling motive. And it's what makes this case so divisive, that everybody wants to talk about and give out these theories because of that very reason. Michael, I want to go backwards and say something, because I read a few different reports since the last time you and I spoke. And do you know there is an AP credited report about what happened at this 5-day preliminary hearing? And it says, according to an affidavit, the affidavit said that the note said, I had the opportunity to take out Charlie Kirk and I took it. But there's other reporting that says the grammar you mentioned. I think it's significant. I think it's a reporting issue, right, in terms of what we're able to get. But I also think it goes to the point of what a defense does, right? They have to look at things like these texts or notes. They're going to look at every single word and pick it apart.
Yeah, it's interesting because not a lot of people would pick that out, right? But I see it automatically. You know what I mean? I see that
because you're a defense attorney.
Exactly. Yeah. And you're trained to look at things in that way. So it'll be interesting how it turns out in trial. There could be two different notes. There could be the note under the keyboard and there's a text. So who knows how that's all going to play out. But trust me, the wording will be an issue for this defense in terms of the credibility of those, because those are very, very damning. Now, when we talk about ballistics, that's another area the defense has something to work with. The pieces of shell that they found in the victim in this case, the testing for the ballistics is inconclusive in terms of a match for what they're calling the murder weapon.
That's
right.
So
now throw that into the pile as well. This idea that you can't quite match that shell casing to the murder weapon, that's a problem.
That's a problem. I think it's a problem, but I think you have to tell the story correctly when you're the prosecution, because inconclusive means they couldn't say it came from that gun and they couldn't say it didn't come from that gun. So if you tell the story well enough as a state and get the jury to follow along with you, at the end of the day, I think you can say that as it couldn't be identified, but that's simply because of the fragment that was remaining in the body. And so you can kind of disregard that, right? Like it's not from the gun. So you can take it at face value and move on. I don't know, Michael, it's a lot, but I still think
Judge,
in the whole
we live in a CSI world. You know what I'm saying? And
no, you're right.
People are like, if it's inconclusive, that's not good enough. You know, it's not good enough. With all the technology, I really believe when you're talking about convicting someone beyond a reasonable doubt, when you have that inconclusive connection, it creates a problem. So what you have, and as I look at this, what I see is you got a lot of evidence that this guy was involved in some way, but you have trouble connecting him directly to the shooting. What does that mean for the case?
Let me ask you a question. I want to add one more fact, and I'm throwing this at you, and we haven't talked about it at all. But after the shooting, around 12:30 a.m. So in the early morning hours on September 11th, there was on the surveillance cameras, it captured a vehicle stopping and attempting to turn onto a campus road. And here was testimony offered by law enforcement. Law enforcement officer Hull testified, and these are quotes. When that vehicle was stopped, it actually made contact with an officer who was doing security detail. He went on to testify. There was something about the interaction that made the officer make a note for the license plate of the vehicle. And then it says when the officer learned a similar car was suspected to be tied to the shooting, he ran the information from that stop and identified the male driver, and the car was registered to Tyler Robinson and his mother.
Ooh.
So what about that, Michael? Does that add anything to the case, or do you feel like that takes it too much into the suspicion of he felt like something was wrong with this guy and that's why he wrote down the plate?
No, I think that's a solid point for the prosecution. Again, I think it plays into their timeline. The fact that he was out of the house during that time, which is backed up by the roommate who says he got home very late that night. So I think all that plays well into the timeline, which I think at this point is the strongest element of their case. That whole timeline that they put together with the videos, the clothing, all of that stuff. I think that plays into that, and I think it certainly helps their case. But I guess at the end of the day, when I walked away from this, clearly there was more than enough information for probable cause, but I'm not so sure that there's enough to overcome that reasonable doubt standard. The thing I wanted to ask you about was the judge made a ruling. There was lots of very graphic video and pictures that only the attorneys and the judge could see. He did not allow that out to the public. And Erica Kirk, of course, the widow of Charlie Kirk, she was designated as the victim's representative. She filed a motion saying, Judge, we traveled all this way. We've been sitting here. We want the world to see what this was all about, the horror and ugliness of this crime. We want to see this stuff as well. Now, the judge ultimately denied it, but I'd love to get your thoughts on that motion.
All right. So first of all, I understand and respect the motion. She's the victim. She's the most direct victim, although their children are victims. There are lots of victims, but she's the most direct victim, I would argue. And certainly understand her desire for transparency. There's so many theories out there. And she even said, we need all these wild conspiracy theories to go away. We want all of this to be transparent so the American people can see firsthand what the evidence is against Tyler Robinson. So I understand the nature of the motion, but I'm also going to push back and say there is no reason in the world, in my opinion, that the public needs to see gruesome photos of a dead person who's been killed. It's unnecessary. Now, I'm surprised if she hadn't seen those photos through the victim advocate's office, right? At some point, you would think if she, the direct victim, maybe not, you may tell me no, but wanted to see the photos, they could ostensibly show her privately, but I don't think the public should see them. I don't think there's a place for the gruesome photos.
I thought it was an emotional family member representing other emotional family members who are tired of all the crap that's going on the internet and want to get the truth out. And this was part of that truth to show the ugliness of the crime. I think the judge clearly did the right thing. You don't want to poison that potential jury pool with these really horrible graphic videos and photos. As far as Tyler Robinson, what's coming up next, apparently September 1st, the judge set a date. They're going to return for arguments. Now, between Friday and that September 1st date, the attorneys will be filing motions. They will come in on the 1st. They will argue those motions, and then the judge will ultimately make his decision.
Right. And you know what? There's no way he's not going to find probable cause, any evidence at all that it happened. And two elements. Number one is that Charlie Kirk was murdered. Number two, that Tyler Robinson is the person the evidence points to as having committed that crime. There's probable cause of that, no doubt in my mind, Michael.
Yeah, I mean, that's a foregone conclusion. And right after that, now, as we well know, Tyler Robinson has not actually even entered a plea. If, in fact, he binds it over for trial, there'll be an arraignment. That's that first appearance under those particular charges. And then he'll have to plead guilty or not guilty. Finally, before we turn the corner here, Judge, do you think with this really strong presentation, which I'll characterize it as strong, even though we said there were some holes in it, do you think it sort of ups the opportunity or the chance for a plea in this case, as we saw in the Brian Koberger case?
Well, the analogies are many, really, to the Brian Koberger case in terms of the pressure exerted to enter a plea in exchange for the death penalty being taken off the table. We don't know that's going to happen, but it feels like a very similar situation where if the prosecution really, really wants a plea and this man really values his life, he's going to say, okay, I'll plead guilty, but I am not agreeing to the death penalty. Take that off the table. If that transpires, I think that is probably going to happen at the end of the day. The other thing I wanted to say, though, strategically, the prosecution had no obligation to present all their evidence. It was their decision as to what to present, what not to present. I do think there's much more, not much more. I think there's more the prosecution has that they decided to hold back. So I don't believe we've yet heard what all of the evidence is. Could be wrong.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, no, that's definitely fair. And it's interesting because there's one of the arguments for the death penalty is cases like this and in Brian Koberger where you have that as a bargaining chip.
Yeah.
And that can lead to plea deals as a way of saying, look, okay, we'll take that off the table, but you'll go away for the rest of your life without having to put everybody through a prolonged trial. But just going based on the evidence, I think there's a fight to be had here. And these attorneys are good attorneys, and I think they will fight if it comes to that. So we'll just have to see how this one plays out.
Yeah, we have a lot left in the legal process.
All right, Judge, we're going to turn the corner now to another case that's really been burning up the internet. And it's this guy here, Nolan Wells, a really, really sad story. Young man, a community college football player, I think was trying to get into Division I. Was apparently a great athlete, good swimmer, goes out for a weekend with some friends on July 4th, gets separated from his friends at some point. At least that's the narrative going around right now. And he ends up washing up on shore dead. Right now, investigators are not treating this as a criminal investigation. They keep saying there's no evidence of wrongdoing. We have to wait for the autopsy to come back. That's where we are. They're waiting for the autopsy. Ben Crump has gotten involved in the case representing the family. He's getting his own autopsy, which my understanding is being paid by either Tyler Perry or Colin Kaepernick. One of those two guys said they're going to handle all the expenses in this thing. So people are getting behind this. I'd love to get your initial thoughts on this case. As I said, it's just a sad, sad case.
It's a very, very sad case. On one hand, I understand there's a knee-jerk reaction of, well, we don't have any evidence of foul play, so it must have been an accidental drowning. But when you have a victim's mother saying, no way would my son have stayed behind, no way, then I think there's a responsibility of law enforcement to back up and investigate. Now, I think they should have handled it from that way from the beginning. I think you should treat it as a crime and prove that it's not. Follow the evidence. See what are the circumstances? What are the statements being given? The autopsy is crucial to find out what really happened to this young man. But I'm bothered. I'm bothered by that jump to the conclusion of, oh, it was accidental. If I'm a parent, God forbid, and lost my child in this way, I too would demand to know exactly what happened. And I'm not going to rest until I feel like everything's been done to figure out exactly what happened. Lastly, trust a mother's gut. And I believe in her gut that keeps saying there's more to this story. And I wish law enforcement treated it differently from the beginning, Michael.
Yeah, here's some of the friends. Apparently they were good friends and had been friends for a while. This wasn't a new group. And again, they got together. They're off the coast of Mississippi. They go to this island, Horn Island. There's a boat. One of the young men says that they went over there to hang out. There was a problem with the boat. He says the last time he saw Nolan was around 3:00. He goes off to the island, says, guys, I'm going to go hang out a little bit. They say there's a problem with the boat. He says, no problem. I'll get another ride back. I'm staying here. They go back. and he never shows up. So again, it sounds weird. What I want to do is I want to play the mother. You talked about what the mother had to say.
Yeah. While you're pulling
And
that up,
they,
just
mhm,
real quick, just a reminder, this is an island where the kids went. This is where they hung out. So it's not as if those
mhm,
were the only 4 individuals. He said he'd get a ride
no.
back. There are a lot of other kids there. My point is there are a lot of other eyewitnesses. But if you treat this as, oh, it was accidental, you've missed that opportunity to speak to all those potential eyewitnesses from the perspective of not it's an accident, not it's foul play, but rather, what is it? What did you see?
Yeah, it's interesting because it affects the way you go about doing your interviews, right? If you're
Yes,
looking at this as a crime, the way you question the witnesses changes a little bit. But if you're not looking at it as some kind of weird circumstance or happenstance, then suddenly the questioning changes and the obligations change under
agree.
those circumstances, right? So
Yeah.
I think it's right to say, hey, we need to take a look at this from the perspective of a young man who is a great athlete and a good swimmer turns up dead on the shore. And so there's lots of contradictions here, which we're going to get into now, but I'll begin with the soundbite from the parents. They appeared, their first real national interview was on Good Morning America with Michael Strahan. So we'll pick it up with them talking about this idea of him separating from his buddies at some point during the
we
day.
all can understand. And I just want to ask you, the friends that Nolan traveled to Horn Island with, they say that he stayed behind voluntarily. Why would he stay behind?
That we cannot answer. I can't fathom why he would. Like,
I don't know why he would. We always taught him to, if you go with a group, you stay with a group. Even when he was in college, he would say, Dad, well, we're going to ride down to a party or something in another city. Now, so I was out telling him, look, if you go with 5, you come back with 5. Do not separate from your group. Because I always say safety is in numbers. And he always said, yes, sir. So he knew to stay with his group. So why would he split from his group? I don't know.
So they make an excellent point there, Judge, as far as that is concerned. And then you put on top of that this idea that, and let's go through some of these things, right? So
Yeah.
the girl that he had been talking to on the island says that they hung out for a while, and once they were done hanging out, he told her he was headed back to the boat with his guys.
Right.
Again,
And
that
then he tells the
contradicts
guys
the story that one of the
Mhm.
guys said, which was he left. We told him we were leaving. He said he was staying. So, there's a contradiction there.
Right.
Turns out one of the guys has his phone and his keys when
Which
he's
didn't
back
make
on the
sense to me.
mainland,
Yeah.
which
That didn't
is
make
a big
sense to me.
problem.
That's a big problem.
The mom says that she thinks something, they went and got the phone back. She thinks there was something deleted off the phone. So you got all these things going on. Judge, please tell me why the investigators can't look at all of that and say, hey, wait a minute. We need to switch gears on this investigation and look at it as something with perhaps some malfeasance.
Right, because it doesn't smell right. It's that smell test, as stupid as that sounds. And it's really not, I'm not saying law enforcement, you have to either treat it as an accident or treat it as a crime. Law enforcement, you have to seek justice. You need to pursue the truth. You need to collect evidence, have interviews to figure out what the truth is. It could be a tragic, horrific accident, but this family is entitled to know that's what it is based on the evidence and not have to wonder and say, no, this doesn't make sense. But when these little things and different contradictions come up, something isn't right. There is more to this story, mark my words.
Recent development, there had been some suggestion that there was this video showing a fight on the island involving a phone or whatever. The mother in that interview told Michael Strahan she couldn't positively identify her own son. She couldn't recognize his voice. It has since come out that that wasn't him fighting with friends at that point in that particular video. So that was one of the things that people were saying also adds to the idea that there might have been some problems here, something more than just an innocent drowning or something, because there was this fight. But it turns out, as far as that particular video showing a bunch of people fighting, you can hear people arguing over a phone, that particular video now has been debunked as not being Nolan.
But you know what, Michael? It says a lot about the atmosphere. You're going to assume, don't presume, don't assume, but there was drinking by someone there. I don't know who, but I'm just saying there was probably drinking. And it sets the tone to hear there was a fight going on. That to me says, wait a minute, even if his voice was not on it and it didn't involve him, what was the fight about? What was the atmosphere that there even had to be a fight, right? It just sets the tone.
Yeah, I would agree. Again, it still raises red flags overall as far as that goes. And quickly, I forgot a point I wanted to mention. When investigators don't classify something as a crime, part of what happens is it makes it difficult to go to a judge and get warrants for things like the kids' phones, right? Because I am of the idea that if anything did happen, the answer is on those phones. It's in text messages.
Right.
It's in phone calls. Maybe there was a flurry of calls at a particular time between particular people that will lead you in a direction of who to talk to and what to ask them. Certainly those text messages, there's going to be extraneous folks who are saying, hey, did you hear about this? Did you see that? Because again, people feel like with all those people, somebody saw something, but when you don't classify it as a crime, you can't then walk into the judge and say, Judge, hey, I need a warrant. I have some probable cause to take a look at this person's phone or that person's phone.
Exactly. You have to have an active investigation to pursue those channels. And again, Michael, why would you not, play defense attorney for me? Because I don't understand. Why would you not begin it as an investigation and rule out, instead of saying it was an accident and getting behind the 8 ball to look at what really happened and collect evidence, why not treat it as an investigation to rule out foul play from the beginning?
All right. I'm going to be honest with the judge because that's just who I am. I want you to take a look at this picture.
Yeah.
And there's one of these is not like the other. Yeah. Some people say that's an issue, right? You've got this type of situation. Cops in Mississippi. Mississippi has a long history, not necessarily being friendly to people of color. Maybe there's that to begin with. So let's start there. That could be an issue. To be fair to the investigators, there may have been something about the body that they saw when they found it that suggested it was in fact a drowning. So they look at it and say it's a drowning until we find something else. They interviewed everybody that they could involved, and no one said that anything was untoward. So they continue to deal with it as in that way, because I think it's probably a very tight-knit, small community. And if you start calling things suspicious, if you start saying suspicious circumstances, pointing the fingers at people, you create problems. But I'm not sure how much it changes, Judge, because as far as the kids are concerned, they've all lawyered up at this point. Now, the cops said they're cooperating, but I don't know what that cooperation looks like. I don't know how far it's going. I know now they've deleted all their social media stuff. It's probably on the advice of counsel. So when you start looking at it from that point, it still brings you back to the same conclusion. Something's odd here, and I need more power as an investigator to get to the bottom of it.
Yes, but if it were my kids in any way, shape, or form involved, they'd been on a boat with this young man, I would lawyer up too for my kid. I am not surprised that everybody's lawyered up. His family, their families. I'm not surprised, Michael, because there's so much at stake for everyone involved. Now, I'm not saying that means interfere with the investigation or don't cooperate, don't provide what you have. I'm not saying that, but I am saying I'm not surprised that everyone has lawyers.
Yeah, and listen, maybe there was some deleting of messages that really had nothing to do with maybe a crime. Maybe it was for something else. And that in and of itself is a crime.
Yeah, and I
Now,
don't
if it's a
believe it.
connection with a murder, it's an even worse of a crime. But that deleting messages off a phone in an investigation is a crime.
Listen,
So that could be a problem. So there could be some crimes charged. So getting a lawyer is not necessarily an issue here.
but listen, I don't believe if anything was deleted, I don't believe it was not related. I call BS. If anything was related off a phone, the only reason I see it would be deleted is because it has something incriminating about this situation. Otherwise, you lose your friend. You lose your friend. You're out celebrating on the 4th of July, and your good friend that you've known for a long time, that you played sports with, he's a great athlete. He's in college playing football. Do you know how few people get that opportunity? He's talented, and he dies. If it's completely innocent, you are going to bend over backwards to figure out what happened. Here's my phone. Like, deleting to me is too big a red flag. They deleted something that people need to know. That's what I think.
Just to play devil's advocate.
Sure.
Look, I'm a kid. Earlier in the day, I had an argument with my buddy over whatever. Some nasty texts went back and forth, and it doesn't look good. So maybe I'm thinking in my teenage, immature mind, I got to get this stuff out of here because that's not going to look good. So it's possible. Look, I don't know either way. But here, let me turn to something else. And this might also be a reason why this has not been classified as anything worse. This is Judge Ashley. Not just
not me. Let's be clear.
Judge Ashley Cole. Okay. She is a chancery judge in that area. Okay. So that's another reason why investigators might be treading lightly. But she goes on social media. She closes down her social media. But before she does, she leaves a statement that says what her son told her. She says, I want to set the record straight. My son says he saw him at 3 o'clock. That was the last time he saw him. He got home 4:30. Hadn't heard from him since. And that's it. Nothing else happened. That's what the story is. I got to ask you, Judge, in a situation like this, is that the right thing for her to be doing as a judge? Clearly as a mom, but as a judge,
no,
does that
I think
create problems for you?
I think it absolutely creates problems because as a judge, it's there's an impropriety if you speak on the guilt or innocence of anyone. If I were still on the bench and I wanted to give you my opinion of a Brian Koberger and say on air, Michael, I don't know. I think the evidence shows he did it, and I think he did it. You can't do that. You can't comment on a person's guilt or innocence. And I think she has inadvertently, as a mother, crossed a line. I don't think as a judge, she should have said anything. She should have gone through an attorney who could make a statement for the child, make a statement for the family. But I do think that she's treading in some dangerous waters as a judge, commenting on any of this.
So my question is this a serious ethical violation? And I would go back to the idea, let's remember, it's not been classified as a criminal investigation yet. So again, is this part of the privilege of it not being classified that way, that she gets the opportunity to say something like this? Or even under these circumstances, is this some sort of ethical violation that she could find herself in trouble for?
Well, let me say this. All right. So we say it's not yet a criminal investigation. However, I do understand they are investigating. So I don't know. I'm not a criminal defense attorney. At what point does it become we're investigating to, oh, now it's a criminal investigation? Is that to me, that's going to be a fine line to determine mayhaps. And so that's why I think it's an ethical violation. It's not, okay, I can comment and say my kids have not been involved and they're innocent because it's not a criminal investigation. Well, if it becomes a criminal investigation, she still said that, commenting on their guilt or innocence, specifically their innocence. I think ethically, she had an obligation. Unfortunately, as a mother, I'd do the same thing. I get it. As a judge, I think ethically she had an obligation not to make any statements.
Yeah, it's interesting.
That's just my opinion.
No, yeah, I would have to agree 100% because judges are not only about, doing the right thing, et cetera, but it's also about the appearance of propriety.
Yeah.
Right. So now if this ends up being something criminal, I don't think you can have the proceedings in that area. I think you got to move it out because of who she is and what she said and the appearance of propriety.
Well, I was just going to say, that's pretty good argument on your motion to change venue. And and especially because it is, from what I understand, a smaller community, a tight knit community. And I think the reality is, if I were the judge and all this had happened, if there are ever criminal charges, we still don't know it's a crime, allegedly, right? So if it ends up being criminal charges, I think if I were a judge, I'd probably say we're moving venues out of an abundance of caution, because I think this is now an appealable issue down the line if it ever got to a conviction of someone.
Yeah, I think right away. I mean, I'm saying this is something that has to happen from the beginning. All right, so we're still waiting for those autopsies to come in. I think that will answer a lot of questions. Let's hope there's no discrepancies between the ones the investigators do and the private one that they're getting, because that would raise all kinds of problems. But hopefully there's some consistency there. And again, that'll tell us if his lungs are full of water or if they're not, if he had some sort of intoxicants in, which his father said he was not doing because he was headed off to do some training pretty much right after that weekend. But we have to wait for those autopsies to come back. And when they do, hopefully we'll get more information.
But let me say this, as well as I do, Michael Bodden has come in, and he's a famous pathologist. He's come in and found different causes of death than the actual coroner or person who did the autopsy in counties. And you can sometimes have that battle of the experts if they're criminal charges, one saying this is what happened and the other saying this is what happened as the cause and manner of death. There's no good, right? Like, unfortunately for his family, for the other families, it's a horrible, tragic, awful situation.
Yeah, it is. I mean, at the end of the day, that is what this is really all about for one family. And then, again, I'm not saying the kids did anything. So quite frankly, right now, we feel for them too. They lost someone that they considered a great friend, and they're dealing with all this stuff. If they're, not involved in something untoward, then just imagine the pain they're going through for nothing. All right, Judge, we are going to turn the corner now.
This is right in my wheelhouse. Everybody knows child welfare. I've done forever. And you think, oh, we're not going to hear something worse than one of the ones we hear in the news. And this is almost one of those. So these are the Siders. And not only do parents live in this home, but the grandmother lives in the home as well. And they're now calling this the House of Horrors. And here's why. Because they live in Hamden, Ohio. And this is in Benton County. There are some pictures of this lovely family. And in June of 2026, June 30th of 2026, there was a search warrant executed on that street. And my understanding is they observed an adult urinating outdoors. That drew them to the attention of that house. And they find one of the most horrific, and I watched a law enforcement officer explaining as a first responder, the horrific scene of what they found.
Yeah, I want to identify these folks. So you got Elizabeth Siders. That's the young woman there. She's 33. The mother of 16 children, could have been 18. She had conjoined twins that passed away at 33. Began having babies at 15.
Yeah.
15, which I want to ask you about a little bit.
And then every year for 10 years.
Jr., who is 38. You got Gary Siders Sr., he's 73. And you got Christina Siders, she's 67. She's the grandmother. So there's that gang right there. Let me play that first responder who came to the scene to check things out. Here's what he had to say, Judge, about walking into that house for the first time.
That has these kind of conditions. You can smell, you can see the cockroaches and stuff like that, bugs just in general. And the conditions, bugs get on the children and stuff, and they scratch and they bite and all that stuff. So their condition wasn't the greatest. As far as the smell, it's just a certain kind of smell. If you've ever been into a house that had those kind of conditions, it's not very pleasant. Typically I wear a mask if I endure those kind of conditions, just a face mask, to kind of help cover that up, because it's awful.
Potent?
Yes.
He goes on to say, Judge, that that's the kind of smell that gets on your clothes. And I've been in those situations. You're going to interview someone, or, again, I grew up in difficult circumstances. There were some folks who just didn't take care of their situation very well. But I just want to get your reaction to that, because the thing clearly that got me, I'm sure it got you, was the cockroaches.
Yeah, the
Crawling around and
cockroaches.
getting on the kids and causing them to scratch. I mean, it's just, I can't even.
And so this is a level of squalor that is so unfathomable. Unfortunately, when I saw kids' cases come in front of me, we saw a lot of this with dependent kids that were being abused and neglected. The squalor is really unimaginable. And I'll give you an example. I went in a home one time and a law enforcement officer said the best description he could give. They wanted me to see some of the homes that were so terrible. And it wasn't a poverty issue. Let me be clear. Were they impoverished? Yes, but it wasn't a poverty issue. They chose not to clean or pick up or throw all their trash away, or they may have mental health issues that prevented them from caring properly. But there was a mug, and it almost looked like coffee had spilled out of the mug. And Michael, you go to move the mug, and roaches just scatter. I mean, it's a level of filth that's really indescribable. And what really infuriates me, and we'll get back on track here, is the fact that it's not just a mother and a father. It's also 2 grandparents, 4 grown-ass adults that allow this to happen and treat these kids this way.
Well, you got to know, under those circumstances, it comes from the top down, right? So they're clearly living like that. I mean, they were saying no one thought anyone lived in the house that they lived in. Mm-hmm. And apparently, Judge, they had been kind of moving around to avoid any detection. These kids, apparently the 18-year-old, none of them had been to school. The 18-year-old couldn't even write her own name. So that's just awful. But I want to ask you, Judge, she started having kids at 15 years old. She had kids every year for 10 years. How is it that no one asked a question? First of all, when she's in there having a kid at 15, and then coming in every year. As a matter of fact, Judge, when she was arrested, she was pregnant.
Yeah.
How does this kind of case fall through the system?
So number one, they didn't want kids. They just didn't believe in using birth control. So she kept popping them out. Number two, this is not that unusual. And when you say, it's unusual, but in the world of child welfare where I work, it's not always unusual. And here's what I mean by that is the fact they moved around to avoid detection. They knew what they were doing was wrong. They knew these kids should be in school. They knew they weren't taking care of them. And so they didn't have to be bothered. They kept them in the house. Think about that book and movie, Flowers in the Attic, which is a series of books in which the children are locked in the attic. If you keep your children hidden, how will anyone know about them? If you homeschool, quote unquote, your children, they're not in the school system.
16 of them?
16 of them. They locked them up. They treated them like pets. And if you have a dog chained in the basement that nobody ever sees, and they're too hungry, deprived to yell or scream, and nobody can hear anything, you're not going to necessarily know, because they didn't let them out of the house by all accounts. The other thing I'll say is they never got medical care. My understanding is she didn't get it for her pregnancies, and the children didn't get medical care. One was described as being on the brink of death when these kids were rescued from this home.
Yeah, so they're being held on $300,000 bond right now. The charges they're facing just don't seem to be enough. 16 counts, so that's one for each child, of second-degree felony child endangerment. That's what they're being charged with. What do you make of those charges, Judge? You almost feel like there should be something worse under these types of circumstances. But I also have to say this, and I agree with you that they knew what they were doing. This is a choice that they made. This isn't about poverty. There has to be some kind of mental health thing going on here, don't you think?
I think there's got to be. I think there is more, whether it's drug use, whether it's mental health. And I don't know that they've done drugs. I don't know their mental health, but there's always more to the story. It's unusual that it is simply evil people. It's also underlying issues. But again, the fact that they moved to avoid detection they were still able to see through whatever those other issues were to know it was wrong and to try to avoid getting caught. So that stands out to me. But Michael, the other thing I want to say about it is when you have individuals like this living off the grid and hiding their kids, and one of them's on the brink of death, I almost wish we would see like an attempted murder charge. So it's intentional in my mind. And most of the times, parents or caretakers caught in these circumstances are charged with felony child endangerment. But do you know, in some states, child endangerment sentences and the sentencing guidelines are actually less years than certain crimes against animals. You heard me right. You heard me right.
I thought you
So,
were going to go in the opposite direction and say there's more years than, let's say, a real serious guy like
and
manslaughter or something.
right. And there may be in some states. That's the problem. I can't tell you every state, but I'm saying that I have seen child offenders get less time in a specific county than those who do horrific things to animals. Now, I think both should be treated equally in my book. I like animals as much as I like kids, but I'm just saying to you, I think that that's probably the best charge in this state. And I hope it's a big sentence and there's 16 counts, but don't you just think theoretically, creatively, couldn't it be attempted murder if it was intentional and he almost died?
I think you got enough for that. Especially when you find, like you said, one of the children on the brink of death, starvation, and mentally they deliberately were trying to hide their situation from others. So I think you absolutely have an opportunity for that under these circumstances. Again, we don't have all the information as to the mental abilities of these folks, the mental health of these folks. So that may play a role in that kind of thing. But my question is, I'm worried about the children, right? The children are going to survive this. They're going to move on. And I use the word survive loosely, right? How do you what's the word I'm looking for? Reindoctrinate these kids to be parts of society. They've never been part of society, Judge. Never.
No, it's, I'm going to say this. First, the amount of resources necessary to treat these children, first medically, because they were described as having medical trauma, most of them, and then mentally. The reality is they don't even know how to eat, because if you just gave them a normal meal and they thought they were hungry and gorged, they'd throw it all back up. Right.
Yeah,
and so
you're right.
they literally, it's having a baby. It's learning how to eat. It's learning how to write your name. It's learning how to speak. It's learning how to know that you're not supposed to be locked up in a basement. So to your point, what I've seen often in these horrific cases is these children require inpatient treatment because all of that has to be addressed and they need all of their needs met. And then the goal is to step them down perhaps to a therapeutic foster home. I can't imagine there's any family worth giving them to. I hate to say that, but with these four yo-hos, I hope there's good family that's related, but I doubt it. So the reality is probably then a therapeutic foster home. And unfortunately, Michael, when you've got 16 kids, no one family can take 16. It's not allowed under the rules and the policies because that's too many kids with issues that one can do. But also, the reality is often the needs are so great that they have to be split up because it's a full-time job to meet the needs of even one of the children. Kids are resilient. I have seen kids endure things that you don't even want to read or hear about. And with the right treatment, they come out of the other side. So I'm optimistic, but it's going to take a whole lot of services and care that's right for these specific needs.
I'm going to take that and hold on to that because, again, this was a very depressing and ugly case. And I didn't even see the children. There were no pictures of them. Clearly, thankfully, that's not something that would happen. But the idea that there is some light at the end of the tunnel, the idea that there are services out there that can deal with this kind of extreme situation makes me feel better about the situation. I'm not going to say good, but makes me feel better that perhaps at some point they'll be able to live relatively normal lives.
Yeah. And I have to say this, she was pregnant. Thank goodness that unborn child will never have to live the life that the 16 siblings did. There's a little bit of hope in all of this. And they've been all saved, thank gosh, because this is, gosh, Michael, I think I'm reasonable and rational. And I can tell you when I'm on the bench, I am, because I'm here's the law, here are the facts, does it prove? Seeing and hearing things like this, I have no use for those 4 individuals. I don't care the reason. They moved to avoid detection. They didn't put the kids in school to avoid detection. They had one a year when they couldn't care for one. I have no need for these individuals at all. I just don't.
Just saw your recent post, and we did a show on a case where there was some jailhouse justice done on a man who abused and killed a young girl. I'm not saying I want to see something like that in this case, but I can't say I'd be too upset either if somebody decided to let them feel a little pain as well. You know what I'm saying? Again, provided that there's not some serious mental health.
Let's talk about Michael. Well, listen, there's too much intent for me to believe it's serious mental health problems. But having said that, I will say this. The reality is, do I think someone in jail has the right to administer justice and determine who gets to be injured or not? Of course not. On the other hand, you and I both know it doesn't matter what we think. These 4 and the crimes they've done to children, they are not going to be treated well by their fellow prisoners. We know that.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, Judge, that's going to do it for us today. Fantastic show. Truly enjoyed it. I hope our viewers got to learn something and got a little bit of a different way of looking at things from the perspective of 2 legal professionals. Any last words for our viewers?
No, just listen. I know we're talking about some really hard cases with a lot of big issues, right? But that's why we're talking about it. We want you all to listen, to get involved, to give us feedback, and talk about the hard cases, because the more transparency we have, the better our system is to help prevent this moving forward.
All right, Judge, it's been a great show. Great time talking to you. Truly appreciate it. As always, folks, thank you so much for joining us. Please, wherever you're watching this, on YouTube or on Substack, be sure to please subscribe. We need your support to continue doing the work that we do. So if you appreciate it and can afford it, please become a paid subscriber as well. All right, Judge, court is adjourned.
Yes.